On August 7, 1942, only 2 months after the Battle of Midway, the United States landed troops on the island of Guadalcanal and began a bloody battle of attrition that decisively ended Japan's ability to operate offensively in the Pacific War. In early June 1942, the United States Navy won a resounding victory against the Imperial Japanese Navy at the Battle of Midway, sinking 4 of Japan's 6 frontline aircraft carriers. Following the victory at Midway, Admiral Ernest J. King, Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Navy, had obtained an agreement with the U.S. Army's Chief of Staff, General George Marshall, to mount an offensive in the South Pacific, which would take the Japanese base of Rabaul in New Britain. But before the Rabaul campaign could be launched, King received word that construction crews were working on building an airfield on the island of Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands. King's target changed quickly since an operational airstrip on Guadalcanal would allow Japanese aircraft to threaten the Allied sea lanes to Australia. But at the highest level, the U.S. sought control of Guadalcanal in order to retain the initiative that it had gained following the Battle of Midway.
Japan suffered a shocking defeat at the Battle of Midway, losing 4 of its aircraft carriers to U.S. dive bombers. The U.S. wanted to continue the initiative gained at Midway. A victory at Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands would create a gap in Japan's defensive perimeter. Therefore, Operation Watchtower is the official name given for America's first attack of the Pacific War. It was hastily planned for August 1942. The invasion was a huge improvisation and became a logistical nightmare. As a result, the Marines had a better name for Operation Watchtower. They called it Operation Shoestring. To properly supply the troops, naval ships commanded by Admiral Fletcher would have to be in the slot, a section of ocean between islands in which the Japanese Navy made regular patrols, and Fletcher considered his ships to be sitting ducks for the Japanese. Logistics, a lack of planes and ports were concerned for resupply and operational success. In the planning stages of Watchtower, beach congestion had been anticipated. However, the commanders had never faced it squarely. For instance, the landing craft were to be used as poor substitutes for cargo ships. Once on shore, each man was to carry 6 cans of sea rations, enough to feed him for 2 days, 100 rounds of ammunition in a cartridge belt, 100 more in a bandolier, 2 grenades, a pickaxe or a shovel, 2 canteens, a gas mask, a first aid kit, and a bedroll, a poncho, and a mosquito net. To make matters worse, concerned about the welfare of his ships, Admiral Fletcher withdrew his ships from the slot on August 8th. There were other problems as well. The Marine troops were relatively new with little to no combat experience. As a result, they had little supplies to conduct an invasion. They achieved tactical surprise and faced little resistance. However, the Japanese responded with airstrikes from the airbase, what we called Henderson Field, and naval attacks. This constant resupply and attacks by Japanese forces were called the Tokyo Express by American troops. Operation Shoestring would become a victory for the United States, but would also become a lesson in logistical planning.
On August 7, 1942, the U.S. 1st Marine Division landed on the island of Guadalcanal. One day after landing the troops, Vice Admiral Frank Fletcher, who commanded the carrier covering force, requested permission from Admiral Robert Gormley to withdraw his carriers. Fletcher claimed he needed to leave because of low fuel and aircraft losses. Also, he did not want to risk the U.S. carriers against Japanese land-based aircraft. The night of August 8th, Fletcher received permission from Gormley to withdraw. That same night, off Savo Island, a Japanese cruiser force under Vice Admiral Gunichi Mikawa destroyed the screening warships under the command of Rear Admiral Victor Crutchley of the Royal Navy. During the battle, 1 Australian and 3 U.S. heavy cruisers were sunk. Rear Admiral Richmond K. Turner was not able to offload supplies to Guadalcanal because of Japanese air raids and withdrew his transports. The Marine commander, Alexander Vandergrift, objected to the withdrawal because the Reserve Marine Regiment, heavy artillery, ammunition, medical supplies, and rations were not yet delivered. The Marines were left unprotected and severely undersupplied and would be vulnerable to Japanese air raids from Rabaul and shelling from Japanese ships. After Savo, the Tokyo Express began. This was the name Allied forces gave to the supply runs of the Japanese who were delivering personnel, equipment, and other supplies to their forces in the Solomons. On Guadalcanal, the Marines had taken a small, unfinished landing strip and named it Henderson Field. They set up a defense perimeter. Because the Marines were temporarily cut off, they spent weeks surviving on captured Japanese rations. The Japanese brought reinforcements from the 35th Brigade from the Philippines, and the situation on Guadalcanal hung by a thread. The slot saw non-stop naval action over the subsequent weeks and months. So many ships were sunk during this time that the waters became known as Iron Bottom Sound. The fighting on Guadalcanal involved attempts by the Japanese to retake Henderson Field, and much of the fighting centered on Edson's Ridge, or Bloody Ridge. The Marines were able to put aircraft on Guadalcanal, and the so-called Cactus Air Force, named after the code name for the island, proved vital to the campaign. The Cactus Air Force provided air support for Marines and scouted Japanese ships approaching the islands. They were able to stem the flow of Japanese reinforcements and supplies, and since the Japanese aircraft were coming from Rabaul, over 600 miles away, they could only stay a short time before having to return back to base. It should be noted that the Marines had a technological advantage against the Japanese. For example, the Marines were using 37mm anti-tank guns against Japanese banzai charges, so the Battle of Guadalcanal was a battle of technology versus the martial valor of the Japanese.
October 1942 saw a change in leadership in the South Pacific Area Command as Vice Admiral William Bull Halsey, Jr. took over for the relieved Vice Admiral Robert Gormley. Pacific Fleet Commander Admiral Chester Nimitz lost faith in Gormley's ability to command, as he was never enthusiastic about the Guadalcanal operation. Admiral Halsey was a more aggressive leader and set the stage for victory on Guadalcanal and the campaign that remained in the Pacific Theater. On the night of 11 October, the Japanese attempted to resupply their ground forces on Guadalcanal with a convoy of ships, while in a separate operation, 3 heavy cruisers and 2 destroyers were dispatched to bombard Henderson Field. A U.S. task force of 4 cruisers and 5 destroyers intercepted the Japanese vessels, sinking 1 cruiser and 1 destroyer while badly damaging another cruiser. 1 U.S. destroyer was sunk and another left badly damaged. However, the Japanese were forced to retreat, failing to complete both their supply and bombardment operations. On 24 and 25 October, the Japanese launched offensives on Edson's Ridge, also referred to as Bloody Ridge, and along the Guadalcanal River in an attempt to take Henderson Field. Several Army and Marine outposts were overrun by the attacking Japanese forces, but with the arrival of the Army's 164th Infantry Regiment on 13 October, the U.S. had the largest troop infusion since the initial invasion, and as a result had the necessary forces to hold the key terrain of Henderson Field and defeat the attack. While fighting would continue into early 1943, Japanese forces never had another opportunity to take the island. November 1942 represented a turning point for the Allies in both theaters of war and can be characterized as the Big Five wins. Guadalcanal in and of itself was a significant victory, as it set the stage for implementation of the island hopping campaign, where the United States seized islands to build airfields, while bypassing and isolating others as the march to Japan continued. However, when viewed with the other significant battles happening or coming to a climax in November of 1942 that include Guadalcanal, North Africa El Alamein, Operation Blue, Stalingrad and the Caucasus, and Operation Torch, the path to victory for the Axis powers in World War II, for all intents and purposes, no longer existed.